From Creamer Media in Johannesburg, this is the Real Economy Report. The National Airways Corporation's 43 Air School plans to double the capacity over the next 5 years to accommodate the growing African and global demand for pilots. Idele Esterhuizen has the story.
Although somewhat subdued over the past 2 years owing to financial constraints in the airline industry, pilot training is expected to pick up in the short to medium term. International growth, especially in China and Africa, is calling for additional pilots to be trained, and NAC's 43 Air School plans to further develop its training services to meet this growing demand. NAC CEO Martin Banner elaborates.
There are about 200 training schools in South Africa, obviously not to this scale. And if you take the 1700 requirement over that number of ATOs, we think we've got the capacity, but we're planning to double our capacity over the next 5 years. There's a big demand in Africa specifically. We're also getting a lot of business from overseas airlines. We've got interest from Cathay Pacific, for example, recently. And this Boeing tie-up has been very good for us because that's bringing a lot of interest from airlines that fly Boeing product around the world. The airlines are going to require the pilots, and there's not a pool big enough for them to draw from, and particularly with growth in China, for example, that's going to require a lot more pilots. So we're going to have to bring a lot of ab initio people through, and that's where we start, is taking people on this Boeing program. Now you heard from street to right seat. It's quite self-explanatory. Taking kids off the street and training them to become first officers on airliners in the right seat of the airline. The airline industry has been in quite a lot of financial stress over the last while, and obviously one of the things that they've cut back on is ab initio training. They've not been doing less flights, they need less crew, but that's going to change, and the demand is increasing. So we're prepared to invest in additional capacity to cope with that demand and that opportunity for us in the future. We bought the school in 2002. We've got 85 million invested in the school to date, and we anticipate that it's going to require another 30 or 40 million over the next 5 years to double that capacity.
Other news making headlines this week: Communications Minister Dina Pule unveils new policy plans, Karongo celebrates its first flight from Johannesburg to Lubumbashi, and new nuclear expansion will create mining and construction jobs. Communications Minister Dina Pule has announced that the Department of Communications is embarking on a process to overhaul the South African information and communications technology policies.
The outcomes of the ICT policy development process have to be aligned to the government's IPEX priorities of fighting crime and corruption, rural development, improving health and education, and creating sustainable jobs.
The maiden flight of new African air operator Karongo Airlines' twice-weekly service between Lubumbashi in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Johannesburg left the OR Tambo International Airport in mid-April.
We are starting today with a twice-weekly service between Lubumbashi and Johannesburg, and as for mid of June we'll be adding more additional frequencies, because we need, there's definitely a need and a huge demand for more frequencies, more capacity on the route with cheaper fares on top of it, and we are currently renegotiating the bilateral agreements between South Africa and the DRC to get those extra traffic rights approved also on the South African side.
Energy Minister Dipuo Peters said at the National Union of Mine Workers Nuclear Energy Workshop that expanding South Africa's nuclear power industry would boost job creation, particularly in the uranium mining and construction sectors.
I don't think there is any debate whether the nuclear industry would create jobs. What probably concerns comrades in NUM most is the possibility that nuclear energy would result in job losses in the coal sector or take away jobs from the coal mining sector. Firstly, the integrated resource plan shows us that nuclear does not intend to phase out the coal power generation capacity. In fact, our coal generation capacity increases up to 2030.
That's Creamer Media's Real Economy Report. Join us again next week for more news and insight into South Africa's real economy.